Welcome everyone, thank you for coming along. So this is our first guest speaker, Kevin Lewis, who has done all sorts of stuff from You Got This conference in the UK, which I think happened the other week, didn't it?
Saturday.
The Saturday, awesome. And currently works at Vonage, I think that's how I pronounce it.
Vonage.
Vonage, there you go. And had done all sorts of cool stuff in the UK with the developer scene and the hackathon scene. He is an incredible speaker, and I'm very excited to introduce him to do a talk on serverless video conferencing applications. Did some sort of stuff like this for Hack Quarantine, and I very much enjoyed those. So hopefully you will enjoy the next hour or so.
Yeah, hopefully. I'm going to share my screen before we kick off. Share desktop one. Share? Allow Zoom to share your screen. All right, here we go. I'm doing it. I'm really worried it's going to cause me to have to quit Zoom.
If that is the case, just make me the host and then...
All right, let's
disappear.
Let's see.
Hey, that worked.
Yeah, I think I can deny that. Awesome. So as Will said, hello, my name's Kevin. I currently work for Vonage as a developer advocate, mainly focused on a region, actually, London. But obviously, what does that mean in 2020? So doing a lot of online stuff at the moment. In the past, I've done a whole host of things. I've run a developer events agency. I was a coach for MLH in Europe. Helped GitHub Education with their Campus Experts program, and a whole host of other bits. And so today I am going to be running this workshop on how to build serverless video applications. We'll use one of the APIs that Vonage has, but also I want to show you a little bit of an introduction to serverless, a little bit of an introduction to using MongoDB with serverless, and hopefully by the end we will have something cool. There are a few assumptions I'm making. So I'm making an assumption that you have Node.js installed on your computer. If you do not, take this next few minutes before I start dipping into code to go grab the installer from nodejs.org. I'm going to assume you have a GitHub account. I'm going to assume you have a Netlify account, but I believe you can sign up for Netlify with your GitHub account. But go ahead and do this while we have a few minutes. I'm actually just going to pop these items in the chat. So as I said, you're going to need Node.js. You're going to need a GitHub account and a Netlify account. We will need at some point a MongoDB Atlas account. I'll talk you through what that is in a little bit. And then inevitably you will need a Vonage Video API account. I'm just going to pop you the link to that now. And I'll give you time when we get to each of these points to sign up for accounts and get settled. We are going to be building a little video conferencing application today. This is not what we'll build, but this is very, very similar to what we'll build. So we'll have a little splash page. We'll get to put in a meeting code, go to a meeting, and that meeting will be a multi-person video call. And that's where we'll stop today. But I'll also give you some next steps on how you can do stuff like having chat, sharing your screen, and other little bits. But this code's on GitHub. So you are welcome to dip in and kind of get the finished code for how to implement these features. I've also written a majority of this workshop as a blog post, build a basic video call platform with Netlify Functions. The only real difference is in this blog post, I use FaunaDB, a different database system. And in this workshop, I'm going to be using MongoDB. But other than that, this gives you a pretty good rundown of how we'll be doing this. So I'll also pop that in the chat just so you can reference what we'll be doing. As you can see, because I am still sharing my screen successfully, I suppose. Yeah, sorry, I got thrown off there. I believe this video will be available later to fellows, but Will can jump in and tell everyone I'm wrong if that is the case. As you can see, I also have the chat open, so if you have questions, please do pop them straight in the chat, and I will pause at convenient points to make sure that I'm addressing any questions you may have. All right, so that is the kind of rundown on what we'll be building today, the technologies we'll be using to do it, and the tools that you're going to need, such as I said, Node.js, GitHub Netlify, MongoDB Atlas, and a Vonage Video API account. Before we continue, just some we are in the midst of a rebrand, so I just think that this will help people kind of understand when I'm using certain phrases what I'm talking about. The Vonage Video API used to be called OpenTalk. When I talk about the Vonage Video API and OpenTalk, you can think of them interchangeably. The reason I'm telling you this is because the package name is still OpenTalk, so I want you to kind of understand that these two things are the same. Likewise, we have a ton of other APIs that let you do messaging and voice and video bits. These communication APIs used to be called Nexmo APIs. So if you've heard of those, they are now Vonage APIs. Again, I think it's really good to just get that out of the way quickly. We're in the middle of a rebrand. And as a result, when you see like Nexmo around, like that's the name of a package name, you understand that they are effectively interchangeable. Okay, so first thing we're actually going to go do is go grab that Vonage Video API account, because there are some keys that we're going to want. What I've done in preparation for this is I have created a new folder on my desktop, Fellows Serverless Video. It's completely empty. I've opened it up in Visual Studio Code. Just be aware that I've done that. You can use any code editor of choice, but I'll be using Visual Studio Code. Now back over on the Vonage Video API account, again, I'll post the link to that. I'll post the link to things as we need them. Go sign up for an account. I, as you could probably imagine, already have an account. And I'll give you a couple of minutes to go ahead and do that. So I won't continue for another 30, 45 seconds, and that should give you enough time to just quickly go sign up for an account. While we do this, let me just give you some rundowns on kind of key concepts here. We have projects. We will be creating a new project for this. Our project has a key and a secret, which we will need in order to build our application. Now, while you're going ahead and signing up for that account, I want to talk to you a little bit around how this is actually going to come together. So where is it here? Video API basics. Right, let's talk a bit around how all of this is actually going to work. There are three parts to this puzzle. The first is our application server. And this we will build in a serverless fashion. So we'll be using Netlify Functions to build this. The second is the OpenTalk Cloud. And the OpenTalk Cloud is actually what deals with sending your video and retrieving other people's video and audio and other data streams. And then finally, we have the clients. You can think of those as people's browsers, their phones, the actual devices that are going to connect to the OpenTalk Cloud. This is how it works. In fact, I thought originally I'd need to make some diagrams, but look at these, they're already made. So your actually, I don't like the animations. I'll talk you through it with this one. So we have our application server, and what that is going to do is tell OpenTalk to go and create a brand new session. The session essentially is just what all we need to care about when we're dealing with sessions is a session ID, a string called a session ID. Then the clients connect to our application server, and the application server must return three things to the client. It must return a session ID, a one-use token. Strictly speaking, they're not one use, but they have short-lived time. So we will treat them like they're one-use tokens. Tokens will also include things like the permissions that a user will have. And finally, our API key. All of that will go to the client, and then the client can connect directly to the OpenTalk Cloud. So our app server, all it needs to do is create new sessions, keep a track of the sessions. We'll be using MongoDB to do that, and then return to the clients a session, a token, and an API key. Hopefully that's all making sense. If it isn't quite settling in yet as knowledge, don't worry, we'll be kind of covering this in more depth throughout the workshop. So I assume you've all now gone and got your Vonage Video API account. And you can go over to this sidebar called Projects and create a new project. You're provided two options. And the option we care about here is using the API. So we're going to hit Create Custom Project. You can provide any name you want, and you can select a codec. I would just say leave the codec as is for now. So VP8 is fine, and we hit Create. What you'll get in return is an API key and an API secret. We're going to need these in order to authenticate with OpenTalk when creating new sessions. And that API key is what's going to need to be provided back to the client. Just a heads up that this secret you should not be sharing with other people. For example, after this workshop, I will get rid of this secret. It won't exist anymore. You should be very careful around sharing this. And in order to make sure that our application still has access to both the API key and secret without sharing them, especially as we have to push our code to GitHub as part of the Netlify deployment process, we're going to go over to our code editor and create a new file called .env, a .m file. And in here, we can create property value pairs that can be not checked in to our GitHub repository. So the first one is going to be API key. I use all caps just as a force of habit, but it doesn't really matter. Equals, no space either side, and then the value, an API secret, like so. And we'll pop the API secret over in our .m file and hit save. So we've now created our Vonage Video API project, and we have a way to access it. As it happens, this is actually everything we need to do in here. We don't need to touch this dashboard again. You can get some interesting analytics, but not for the sake of this workshop. Now we're going to go ahead, now that we've got those keys so we can access this later, we can access this project later, and we are going to set up a Netlify function. So at the beginning of this workshop, we'll be doing a few basics in different areas, and then it will all come together, hopefully quite nicely in a little while. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open a terminal in the directory that we have created for this project. And we're going to want to type in npm. Can someone just give me a heads up? How's the font size doing? Because I can bump it up if that helps, but I just need some feedback that this is either okay or a little too small. All good. Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to type in npm init space and -y. -y will just essentially answer with all of the default answers that normally if you just type in npm init, you'd have to go through one by one. So now we've got this package.json file. Now we're going to go and install the dependencies we'll require for this project. We're going to install all the dependencies, and I'll explain what they do as and when we use them. To do this, we type in npm install, and then we can put in as many package names as we want, space separated. So we're going to require Netlify-lambda. This is what we'll be using to build Netlify functions locally. Next, we will need MongoDB. Next, we'll require OpenTalk. Then we'll require .env in order to access the properties in that .m file that we have just created. And finally, encoding, and this is just a weird Netlify quirk that I found in some context, and this package seems to fix it. So we can go and hit enter. Now I'm going to go ahead and just, if you are having issues, maybe you mistype things by one character, I've just popped that in the chat for you. And we'll just wait a few seconds while those dependencies install. They will install any moment. What was the command before that? Oh, npm init -y. And what npm init -y does is it creates a package.json file. And as you can see, once we've installed it, the dependencies that we have installed have been included in this dependencies file. So npm init -y, and then npm install Netlify Lambda, MongoDB, OpenTalk, .env, and encoding. Okay, I'm going to assume you're all good. Again, just give me some feedback if I'm going a little too fast. I am aware of the clock. All right, we've installed these dependencies, great. The next step is to go to this npm scripts section, and we are going to write a couple of new scripts that we require to run Netlify functions locally and build them when they go over to Netlify. Someone's got their microphone on and I can hear it, just as an FYI.
Kevin, you'll be able to mute everyone so that you won't get random noise like that.
I can do that, but also people keep joining. So I'm either going to have to keep doing that or just let people know. It's a bit of a, neither is amazing, but yeah, no, thanks for letting me know. If it happens in my eardrums again, I will go and mute everyone. So the first additional script we are going to want to create is called Netlify :serve. You can call it whatever you want. I like calling it Netlify :serve. I think it's very explicit what this does. And the value is going to be Netlify-lambda serve functions /src. Now, this won't mean much yet, and I'm hesitant to explain it until I get a couple more steps ahead where this will make more sense. But what you need to care about is this will take functions that we write in a folder called functions/source, which we haven't created yet. It will build those functions, watch for changes, and run it on a localhost port. The other one we're going to want to create, I'm actually going to just copy and paste the one. I'm going to copy and paste this, and we're going to change out both instances of the word serve for the word build. What this NPM script will do is it will take all of the functions that we have written in functions/source, and it will build the final versions of those, but it won't start a development server. While we're developing, we'll be using this one, and when we're deploying, we'll be using this one. Okay, the final step before we can get to writing a Netlify function is creating a new file called netlify.toml, T-O-M-L. This is going to be a really short file. First line is going to be build in square brackets. On the next line, do an indentation, and the value will be functions equals, and then in quotes, /functions/build. I'm going to explain again this line in a little more depth, but these two things work together. Netlify serve and build creates functions in functions/build from our source files in functions/source. And then what this file does is say the versions of the functions that you should run are in functions/build. So the final built versions. So we have netlify.toml, we have package.json with 2 new scripts, and this is actually all we need in order to get started. Now we can go and write our first Netlify function. And again, if you need a little more time in areas, just give me a heads up in the chat, and I can give you some time to do that. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit more time. I'm going to go a little bit slower to a point, and then I'm going to encourage you to watch this workshop recording. But this is what you will need. We have netlify :serve, which is netlify lambda serve functions/source, and we have netlify :build, which is netlify lambda build functions/source. They're coming in the chat. And then we have a netlify.toml file, which looks like this. So I'll give you just a few more moments to get that in, and then I'll have to continue. Kenneth, in particular, as the person who gave me feedback that you needed me to go a bit slower, give me some indication of when you are good. That would be really helpful for me. So just to recap what we've done so far, we've run npm init-y. We've installed our dependencies. So those dependencies were Netlify Lambda, MongoDB, OpenTOC, encoding, and .env. Then we went into package.json, added 2 new scripts, and we created a netlify.toml file. Seeing as I've popped both what needs to be typed in package.json and netlify.toml in the Zoom chat for people watching live, I'm going to continue, again, mostly in the interest of time. So I'm going to create that new folder called functions. And I'm going to create a folder inside of that called src, source. And this is the folder where we will write Netlify functions. So I'm going to create a function, and I'm going to call it session.js. Almost doesn't matter what it's called, but I'll call it session.js. Now we're going to go ahead and write this function. Now the function should be assigned to exports.handler. So exports.handler is going to be an asynchronous function that takes 2 arguments, event and context. And remember, this is a Netlify functions thing. So all of our logic, when this function runs, should go in here. Because this is an asynchronous function, and there are a few points where errors might occur, I'm going to wrap the entire contents of this in a try-catch block. So whenever there's any error that happens in the try section, it will run whatever is in catch. I'm going to be really boring and just do a console.error, whatever the error is here. Now let's focus on this try block. All we need to do is ultimately we need to return an object return. This object has to contain three things: a set of headers, which we'll write in a moment, a status code, which will be a number. Now, I'm not going to go too much into HTTP status codes. What you need to know is 200 means good, 300 is a redirect, 400 is generally a user error of some description, you're not authenticated, not found, not a supported method, things like that. 500s are server errors. There's been some issue in running the server-side logic. So in here, we're going to give it a 200 OK status, because if we've made it to this point, because this return statement will go at the bottom of this try block, everything is good. So we have this status code. And then finally, we provide a body. A body is the data we will return, and it must be a string. I'm just going to say, OK. Now let's talk about these headers. There are two headers. Well, there aren't two headers we need to provide. You can be very granular here. I want this to be a nice, easy workshop, free of what are known as cause errors. So I'm going to say, regardless of which application is trying to use this endpoint, I will allow it. In the real, you might want to be a bit more stringent on this, a little more strict. But in order to allow any person to access this Netlify function, whether it's hosted on the web on another domain or running locally, there are two headers we need to provide. The first is called access control, and note my capitalization of every word, allow origin, and the value will be a star and asterisk, and this means everything, wildcard, all good. The second header will be access control allow headers, and the value will be content type. This is coming in the Zoom chat for you folks. So now we have written our Netlify function. This is all it's going to do. It's not going to do any logic. It's just going to return a 200 status, and the body will be OK. So let's get to trying to run this. We've already written an npm script to make this easier for us. So we can run npm run netlify : and serve. And it will go ahead, start that server for us, and it will be listening on port 9000. And it will be listening on localhost 9000 / and then the name of the function. So in this case, /session. And what you may have noticed is it's also created this build folder, and there's a sessions.js in here. Now this is a much more obscured file. It's also minified, and this is the version that is actually running on port 9000. Every time we make a change to sessions.js, I'll hit save, it will go and it will rebuild that function for us. So we will write code in the source folder, and it will run from the build folder. But you should never change the code in the build folder, because it will just be replaced when you change things in the source folder. Now let's go ahead and try this endpoint. There are a number of ways to test endpoints. You might have experienced a piece of software called Postman. You might be used to doing curl requests. I like using a tool called Postwoman. It is a Chrome and Firefox extension. I just find it a little easier. You don't need to sign up. It's quite nice. It's a progressive web app, so it kind of feels like a native application. I'm going to show you curl and Postwoman for this first example. Then in future, I'll move to just using Postwoman. So in my terminal, I can type in curl. After writing the above, what did you use to run the code? So I ran in package.json, I ran the Netlify serve script. To do that, you write npm run and then the name, Netlify serve, and then the name of the script. So curl http localhost : 9000 / session. And we'll see over in the Netlify Functions runtime terminal thing. It says we got a request, a get request to /session, and we returned a 200 response. And we can see here the response was okay. Now, I'm getting quite a few questions for things I've already covered, and while I'm happy to cover things I've already covered, in the interest of time, I'll answer the last question I've got. I'm going to request that we like watch on demand if we need previous steps. In answer to, I missed the file with the API key, could you post it? No, because this is meant to be a file with your API key and secret. The way it's meant to look though is API_key equals and then your OpenTalk project key, and API_secret equals and then your API secret. But that is your own key and your own secret, and you also shouldn't share this file. And we've not used it yet, don't worry. So I'm getting a question, why do I get invalid command server functions source? Let's take another look at this package.json and make sure you have written it correctly. So Netlify -lambda space serve, not server. I think you might have written server functions /source. Okay, great. I'm going to continue. For the most part, I'm going to keep the pace of this progressing forward. If you have errors, tell me. If you're missing previous steps, I would prefer you watch on demand, just to make sure that we can keep this a nice tight workshop and don't run too far over. So I've just hit this endpoint, localhost 9000/session. The value is okay. This is great. Using postwoman, you can pick a method. In this case, any method will work because I'm not being specific here in the function. Localhost 9000/session, hit send, and we get status 200, response okay. So I'll be using postwoman because I think it's a little easier to visualize what's happening, especially when we start returning larger responses. But you can use curl as well. Okay, so I've got this sessions.js. We are returning okay. Before we continue here, this is working, the Netlify Functions ACE. We're going to need to set up a few other little bits in order to build our application. Next in the list is MongoDB. So for those of you who don't know, MongoDB is a database. MongoDB is also a company, and MongoDB as a company hosts MongoDB instances in a product that they call MongoDB Atlas. I'm going to log into my account. And I'm going to show you how to create a new Atlas instance. So up here in the top left, you can go and create a new project. You can call your project whatever you want, as long as you do not already have a project called the same thing. I'll just call mine MLH Fellows Video and hit next. I now get to add members, set permissions. I'm not going to do any of this right now because I'm not working in a team, I'm working alone, and I'm going to hit create project. Awesome. Now that I've created this project, I can create what is known as a cluster. We're not going to get too much into depth around MongoDB terminology. We're actually just going to go and build a cluster. We're going to go for the free tier. We are pretty much just going to pick all the default options. If you have a preference for your instance to be in a particular region, you can go and do that. We'll be using their free tier because that's more than enough. You can give the cluster a name. It honestly doesn't matter at this point. I'm going to leave it as default, and I'm going to hit create cluster. And this will take a few moments. So I'm going to just take pause. I'm going to take pause. I'm actually going to show my code. I'm just going to pop that up. So if you're falling a little behind, you can go and copy and paste that while we're going ahead. How's everyone getting on so far? You following along okay? I'm going to assume from the resounding silence that the answer is brilliant. Everything's fantastic, making perfect sense. Everything's working first time. All right, I think we might almost be done here. Yeah, no, I'm still creating my MongoDB cluster as well. Or I'm not sure if you mean your MongoDB account. In any case, we are almost done here, but we're not quite there yet. I'm not going to cover what clusters are today because actually we start to delve into not complex, like more complex MongoDB and database concepts than I want to today. I encourage you to go read yourself. Yeah, I'm not going to try because I will go down a rabbit hole and you'll struggle to get me back out of the rabbit hole. This is not a database though. This is a cluster. This is a place where our database will live. Remember when we created the cluster? It turns out I started going down the rabbit hole. We picked a provider, we picked a region and so on. So that will be a cluster. You can have data across sharded across multiple clusters. We don't need to do that for this, but you can do that. All right, your cluster is being created. Take this moment for a little drink. While we're, right, we're done. Okay, right. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to hit connect. So we're going to hit connect here. Actually, I lied. We're going to hit collections. We're going to do collections first. A collection in MongoDB, if you've used other database technologies, is equivalent to a table. So we're going to be adding our own data. We get to pick a database name and a collection or table name. The database name can be whatever you want. I'll just call this MLH. And the collection name, I'm going to call this sessions because that's what we'll be storing. And it will be storing session names and session IDs. And we hit create. And it will go ahead and do that. So this is a database. This is our cluster, which can contain multiple databases. The database is called MLH. Our collection is called sessions. Our table is called sessions. And inside of sessions, we'll be creating what are called documents. In other databases, these are sometimes called records. So just terminology is a little different between database technologies. Okay, so now we have created our new collection. Here we are. So I went to collections, created a new collection, database name MLH, collection name was sessions. Next thing we're going to do is hit connect. Now we're actually going to get what we need. Yours should not be telling you to pay if when you created the cluster, you picked the shared tier, which is on the far left. You can also only create one cluster in a free project, I believe, on MongoDB, one cluster per project. So if you're seeing that, you've either already created a cluster, you're trying to create a second, or you created a cluster not using like the shared free resources. You can go up here, create a new project, and so on. I'm going to leave you to do that, and I'm going to crack on. So we hit connect here. First thing we need to do is whitelist a connection IP address. Which IP addresses can actually access this database? Well, we're going to add our own computer, our own IP address. Next, we need to create a MongoDB user which can access this database. You can create multiple users with different levels of permissions. I'm going to create one. I'm just going to call it admin, and I'm going to let it auto-generate a password for me. What I will do, though, is I will copy this password because we're going to need it very shortly. And in fact, just to keep it ready, I'm just going to dump it in the .m file. We will be coming back to this in just a moment. Create MongoDB user. So we've whitelisted our IP address. We've created a MongoDB user. Now we get to choose a connection method. And we are going to connect our application. What it's done is given us this string. In fact, let's see what we get in here. No, we will just take this one string. So we'll click to copy this string. And this string is going to go in our .m file, but we're going to change a couple of pieces of information, as you can see, like password and DB name. So hit copy, go to your .m file, and create a new environment variable called DB URL, and paste the string. In place of your password, we will put our password from earlier. So that's our username, that's our password. And then we need to provide a database name. Our database name is MLH. And hit save. So now we have our API key, our API secret, and our database URL, which includes our authentication details and the database we are trying to connect to. We will not need this .m file anymore. These are the only three things I think that we're going to need. Okay. And then we can go ahead and close this. Now, the final thing to note, and I'm going to do this now so we don't have to get bogged down in it later. No, hold that, pop that over there on the shelf, and we will come back to it later. All right, we set up our database, we set up our connections, and we've got the string that we require, the URI in order, or the URL in order to connect. Now let's go back to our session.js and do the work to actually connect to this database. So we're going to go up to the top. The first thing we're going to do is require.env. And at the end of that, we run a .config method. This now means we can access the values in the .m file in a object called process.env. So process.env.db_URL is equivalent to the string that is in the .m file now. We'll be using that in a bit. Next, we are going to require the MongoDB node package. We can do this with require. No, we're not. We're going to go const Mongo client equals require MongoDB dot Mongo client. There we are. So we've now included MongoDB in our project. Finally, we want to actually create a new instance of this Mongo client with our database URL. So to do that, I will create a variable. I'm going to call mine Mongo. You might want to call it something else, but I'll be calling it Mongo. And this will be a new Mongo client. This takes two parameters. The first parameter will be our database URL. So that's process.env.db_URL. And the second value is going to be an object full of options. The only option we need to care about is called use, you ready for this? Use unified topology tree. I'm actually just going to take these 3 lines for you. I'm going to pop them in the chat. So now Mongo is equivalent to our database. Inside of this try block, use unified topology. Come ask me this at another point. Use unified topology. There was, when I built this workshop, there was an error. I fixed the error by doing use unified topology using this exact Stack Overflow post. As you saw, it was a purple link, and they talk a little bit about it here. I don't really understand in great depth what this does. If you are interested, by all means, go ahead and read. I used it to fix an error that otherwise we would all be getting. Yeah, so originally I just omitted this. And it worked, but I was getting a warning in the console, and I'm not a big fan of getting warning in the like loads of warnings in the console. So use unified topology. All right, now inside of this try block, let's actually connect to our database. First thing we're going to do is we're going to write await mongo.connect. This will connect to the database and complete that process before we will continue on to the next step. Next, we will create a variable called sessions, and this will be equivalent to await mongo.db. And so we provide the name of a database. Which connection method did you use on the MongoDB web interface for the link? It was called connect application. Overview. No, sorry. Here. Connect your application. There's the string. All right. Await MongoDB. We provide the name of the database. It's MLH. Dot collection. We provide the name of the collection, which we called sessions, plural. Which we called sessions, plural. Fantastic. Sessions, plural. Now we can access our database with sessions. Finally, let's just try and insert, like when this function runs, just like a random items to test that this is all playing ball and working. So I'm going to create, so I'm going to just go await sessions.insert1, and this is going to be an object. You can make it whatever you want. I'm just going to call my name Kevin. Oh, it turns out I can't type name or my own name. Anyway, name Kevin. And then finally, when we are done, we will do await mongo.close. So it's all pretty straightforward, I think. We connect to the database, we grab the individual collection, we insert a single record, and we close our connection, as is best practice. I'm going to hit save. Just wait for my Netlify function to read. Oh, getting some warnings. I'm going to ignore them for now because they are just warnings. If things don't work, we will resolve it. If they work for this workshop, we will leave it. Okay, so let's go and hit localhost 9000/session again. So it returned okay, took a little bit longer, which is promising. Go over here, and there is our one object in our database. It gets provided a random ID and a name. For the time being, I'm going to ignore the warnings in the console. If they become issues later, we'll deal with them. Now that we know we can insert data, I'm going to just delete this one because this is not what we want to push into this collection. But that's fantastic. Just going to comment this out for now. All right, now let's work on, we've kind of done our setup bits now. We've set up a Netlify function, we've set up a database, we've connected to the database. We've got some API keys for the Vonage Video API. Now let's actually start the real task, which is we need to create and store sessions in that MongoDB instance. So what we're going to do here is at the very top is we are going to create a new variable called OpenTalk, and we will require OpenTalk. Then we will initialize that. The OpenTalk documentation uses capital OT as its kind of main variable name for an instance of the OpenTalk library. I'm going to do the same, just so if you ever go back and look at the docs, you have some parallel. So const OT, and that's going to be a new instance of OpenTalk. Two parameters. The first will be process.env.api key, and the second will be process.env.api secret, which both come from our .env file. So now we have initialized a new instance of the OpenTalk client. Now let's actually go and create a session. I'm going to write this as a separate function at the very bottom of my application. And I will explain why once I've done it. So I'm going to create a new function called create session. Here we are. Now this will return a promise. So we'll go return new promise, resolve reject, just like when we create promises normally in JavaScript. And we are going to, in here, go ot.create session. And this takes a parameter, which is a function. I'm going to write it all, then we'll talk about it together. First value is error, second value is session. And if there is an error, we will reject with the value of error. And if there is not an error, we will resolve with the value of session. Let's talk through what's happening here. This is really the bit we care about. We just go and create a new session. We don't need to provide any other information. If there's an error, we will reject, which means this will return an error. And if we call this inside of this function, it will go straight down to the catch block. And if it was successful, we will return the information about the session. Why did I create this as a separate excuse me, a separate function. For those of you who don't know what promises are, or just kind of writing synchronous JavaScript or asynchronous JavaScript, essentially this operation sometimes can take, just a few extra milliseconds to complete. And if we don't wrap it in a promise, and it doesn't return a promise at the moment, if we don't put it in a function and promisify it, then sometimes our code in our main function will skip down to the next line before we finish doing this. So we create it as a new function which returns a promise. That means we are promising that something will be returned. It will either resolve successfully with the data that is returned to us from the OpenTop cloud, or it will reject with an error. Okay, now up here, let's actually try and use it. So we are going to go ahead and let's think through what is the most appropriate next step. Let's go and create a new session. And the value of this will be await. And the reason we can write await here is because this is a promise. If this was not a promise, await would not be doing anything here. And what await does, it says wait for either a resolve or reject before continuing on to the next line. So we will await create session. And that's it. And then we'll console.log the session. That's what we're going to do for now. And we'll build on this step by step. So we'll just wait for our Netlify function to go again. I think that's happened. Only one way to find out. We're going to go back over here. We're going to hit send. Ah, awesome. There we are. And so this is our information for our new session. Here we are. It's this object here. There's a bunch of information in here. We actually don't care about a lot of it for this. All we care about is this session ID. Here it is, this session ID. And that exists now in the OpenTop cloud. Our clients eventually can connect to using this session ID. But right now we're not storing it. So every time we call this function, we are creating a brand new session. We don't want that. We want to store a name. And we want to save a session ID. And that will allow us to do the thing where we type in a nice name, a name for a room. And what we get back is a session ID associated with that name. So we've created our new session. Now what we're going to do, and we only care about session ID really. So what we're going to do is go await. You know what I might do? I might just uncomment this line and move it down. Sessions.insert1. It's going to have a name. And it's going to have a session ID. And the value will be session.session ID, which will be this returned value. Let's talk about this name. We're going to need a way with this endpoint to provide a name. So what we'll do is at the very top is we'll go const name. We'll destructure that. Equals json.parse event.body. Don't worry too much about this. We are almost there in kind of making this line a bit more palatable. But now that we have a name, we can just provide name. I'll just make this a little easier to read. All right, so now we are, when someone hits this endpoint, we're going to grab the name, which we're going to need to provide to this endpoint. I'll show you how in a moment. Then we are going to load the sessions collection, create a new session, which will give us a session ID. And then we'll insert in MongoDB the name that we were provided and the individual session ID. And then what we'll do, I think, is let's just play around with this return statement. Now, I said this has to be a string. We're going to want to return an object. The way we do this is we go json.stringify, and now inside of here we can put an object. It'll actually be sent to the client as a string, and then our client can turn it back into an object. So we have this json.stringify. Let's just try session ID will be equivalent to session.session ID. Let's just see what this does. So we'll hit save. We'll wait for this to go again. Awesome. And we are going to hit send. Now, there's no name at the moment. We're going to need to do something about this. We have to send a post request now in order to send a data body. And what we'll do is, where is it? Oh, raw input, here we are. We turn it on and we send an object, and the object we'll send is just name, and we'll call it something else, Amy. Hit send. Oh, and there is an error. Why? Let's take a look. Unexpected token in JSON at position 6 in JSON.parse. So there was a problem with this JSON.parse, I believe. Let's look into this together. Unhandled promise rejection warning. Interesting. All right, there are a few things here. There's actually a few little things that it's given us heads up on. The first is going to be over in this create session block. Now, there is a chance that this promise will fail, and it will fail before it gets to this line. Perhaps there's something wrong with this text. In order to do this, in order to fix this, we'll do the same thing we did in the main function. We'll do a try catch block. We'll move this into the try block. Then in the catch block, we will reject with E, because that's E. So that should fix one of our challenges. Now, another challenge is when something goes wrong, at the moment, we're not returning anything, and we should return something. We should return a 500 code. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy and paste this down here. There will be a body, I suppose. We'll print whatever the error is. And remember, we want a 500 because things are not okay if we've got to this point. Oh, yeah, sorry, and I removed this. Console.log p or console.error p. All right. And I might just, to make this a little easier to read, move my terminal over to the right. Yeah, I think that's better. And wrap my text. Okay. Let's take a look at what the issue is here. So we'll cancel this because that never returned even with a 500 response. Oh, look, there's a little issue there. It's not behaving. As is the world of live demos. Let's close Postwoman. Let's try that again. All right, great. We are now getting an error, which is better than not returning anything. And it's saying, as I said, there is an unexpected token, N, in JSON at position 6. I think I know why this is. JSON requires strings to be double quoted, and it also requires the properties to be double quoted. And I think that might actually have just been our issue, like it was. All right, can we make this response a little easier to read? It's not that important. All right, we've got an object back, session ID, and there's the session ID that is associated with our new item in the database. Let's hit find. Brilliant. So now we've got name, Amy, session ID, that's session ID with the session ID from the OpenTop cloud. All right. Fantastic. So we have now successfully created a session and we've stored it in a database. Now there is one final thing we're going to do here. This is a little finicky. We are going to write an if statement at the top of this try block. I'm going to write it quite quickly. I'm going to pop it in the Zoom chat, then I'm going to explain it. So we're going to say if event.http method is equal to options, then we are just going to return essentially the headers and the status code only. Now there are a few extra things we need to add here. We need to add an additional header called allow post, and don't worry, I will be explaining this in just a moment. And the status code is 204. Okay, right. Let's talk about what's going on here. We are going to be building a browser application for this as well, a little desktop application. And sometimes when you make HTTP requests, it will first go off and send a request called a pre-flight check. It has an HTTP method type of option, so a get or a post request. Options is another method. And what is expected is that we will return in this allow header every allowed method. The reason we need to put this in is otherwise we will do the options request and we'll just start trying to run all of this and it will error. And then the options request will error and we can't make the request. I can't remember what HTTP 204 is. Hang on. HTTP 204. No content. So we can just send like a success without also sending a body along. All right, let's wait for that to go. All right, now that we can create a session, what we're going to want to do is only create a session, a new session, when a session of the name doesn't exist. For example, if I was to now create a session using this postwoman application and it had a name of Kevin, it would create it because there isn't already one that exists. If I try and create another one with the name of Amy, it shouldn't create a new one, because then what I'll do is the first user will enter their room with a session with the name of Amy and their session ID. The second user will do the same, but the session IDs won't be the same. And as a result, they won't talk to each other. They'll just be all on their lonesome. So we want to check if there's already an existing session. If there is, we want to get the data from that session. If there isn't, of course, we want to create a new one. So now we're going to go ahead and do this. So let's just recap what we've written so far. So we grab the name out of the event body, we connect to the database, connect to sessions, create a new session every time, and then we'll insert that data in a database. This is the bit that we want to make conditional. So we connect to sessions. Now let's check if a session of this name already exists. So I'll just call it, I'll do a let, I'll call it session. And the session will be sessions.find1. And I want to know when the name property equals this name variable that we've got in. So where name equals name. Now this will either return an object, it will return the document from MongoDB, or it will return undefined, because the value will be, there won't be one, it won't have found one. Because undefined is a falsy value in JavaScript, we can start to wrap this up in an if statement. So I can say if session doesn't exist, go, create a new session. Excellent. And what I'll do, because obviously I can't create two variables with session, is I will reassign the value of session to our new session. So let's just, that was a bit wordy. Let's talk through. So we're going to come in, we're going to check if the session already exists. If the session exists, great, we just continue. This if statement never runs. If the session doesn't exist, what I'll actually do is I will create a new variable called new session. I'll go and create a new session. That will get our session ID back. I will insert the data in the database, and I will assign the value of this new document to our session variable. Tell me in the chat if this doesn't make sense. So now, by the point we get to line 34, session will every time have a session in it. It will either be an existing one, or it will be a brand new one. So what we'll do here, is we'll just console.log session.session.id. We could console log the whole session, but the ID is the thing that's different. So in each instance, so I just want to check that. So we'll just wait for our function to rebuild. Oh, I should probably zoom down. I think that might have happened. So name Amy should not have returned. Oh, no, should have returned nothing because we are trying to return session.session ID, and that doesn't exist. Oh no, it should exist. Right, another error. Oh, we're hitting a few of these today, aren't we, folks? Right, let's take a look. There's an undefined. So session.session ID is undefined. All right, let's take a look here. I am not using the new session. So the thing is, yes, you caught me. Thank you. This should be new session. Good catch. Thank you. I do like doing these online. People are like more eagle-eyed than normal, and they really help you out when things go wrong. Right, let's try this again. Still not returning anything though. So why is that? Oh, I don't think my function finished rebuilding. Nope, still getting errors. Oof. Right, let's take a look at this. Still undefined. So session.session ID is still undefined. So you know what we'll do is we'll create a new variable here. We'll just call it A. I'm not really fussed what it's called. And we'll console.log A. Then we will not return session.session ID. We'll just we'll go back to returning an empty object. It doesn't really matter. So now we'll get to see what A is here. We'll get to see what session is here. All right, so I'll just wait for that to rebuild. And I think I'm starting to come up on the, I think we started about 1/4 past. So I'm going to try and not take more than 15 minutes over my slot. So I'll aim to wrap up by 1/2 past. So I know for some of you it's quite late, and I'm interested in getting you off to sleep. Right, let's create this. All right, let's see what logged here. A promise. So let's take a look. So we, yes, this didn't continue. It didn't complete before we continued on to the next line of code. We can pop the word await in here. I might just nip this console log out. I might pop this one back in. And sorry, I might also just put this back on session, because this is definitely where we want it to be. And we will just wait for that to rebuild. Visual Studio Code will allow access to files in your desktop folder. Sure. I don't know why you're asking me that now. Right, I hit send. And there is a session ID, right? It ends UH4. I mean, we can take a little look at it. I can send it again. Oh, got a MongoDB error. Interesting. Though interestingly, it did. Oh no, that was the previous one. All right, let's take a little look. Topology is closed. Please connect. I'm just going to try something which is a little hunch, which is I'm not going to await the Mongo close. I'm just going to mongo.close. I'm going to just take a little bit of a closer look at this. So await mongo.connect. We connect to sessions. We grab the current session, find one. Let's console.log that. Now, if session doesn't exist, we'll go and create a new session, await create session. Wonderful. And the session then will then be equal to the new document that we create here. And then we return session.id. Then we close. Looks okay to me. Let's hit send. All right, so there's our ID, and in fact, the ID might be the easier thing to keep an eye on here. Run it again, and I get a Mongo error. Interesting. What's happening the second time? Topology is closed. Please connect. I mean, this might be the moment where I go and refer to the version of this application I've actually built. And see what we're doing differently here. So we have session. It's all looking very similar, hopefully. We await a connection. We go and grab all the sessions. So we connect to the connection. We go and find one. We've done that. Then if the session exists, we do something. And if the session doesn't exist, oh yeah, no, that, but in this context, we're going to create a new one. In my application, we don't do that. We don't create one automatically. Okay, let's try this. And I'm trying to find where the error is. And I'm trying to figure out if it's in this code by commenting it out. And we'll figure this out. We'll figure this out. I'm not too concerned. All right, we hit send. It works. That's the first time. All right. There's our session ID. There's our thing. Fabulous. We're going to run it a second time, and I still get the error, which means it's not here. It's almost certainly something up here. So it's saying topology is closed. Does it have to do with the time between requests? I don't think it does. I don't think it does, unless it's something that's happened literally in the last hour, because I tried all of this. This morning. Interesting. Topology is closed. Please connect. I mean, do you want to know what? You know, just why don't we Google the actual problem? Right. Oh, that's still the problem. This does not look to be the thing that will help. Let's try this one. I found the solutions problem. I'm not sure. The client.close in the finally block, it was closing the connection before the connection was finished inserting the user. All right. Let's wait for that to kick off again. And in fact, did I write mongo.close in here? Ah, you'll notice the distinct lack of it, which I've just noticed. All right. We hit send. Okay, we hit send. Okay, all right. Okay. All right, so this is our, if the session exists, we grab it. And if it doesn't exist, we will go and create a new session. We will return that into the session variable. And I'll just remove all of these console logs and the forsaken line. Okay. So now we're only creating a new session when there isn't already a session of that name. Let's go ahead and just check our Atlas collection. So we still only have one here, which is great. Hello. No. Could you mute your mic, please? Sorry, I thought that was someone telling me I'm running over. Right, we hit run now, and we get one for Amy. Wonderful. We will replace that for Kevin or Kev, and we get an undefined. Let's see why we got this undefined. I'm gonna have to mute folks. How do I? Oh, it's down here, isn't it? Can I mute every?
Press participants and just let mute everyone. Or...
Yeah.
Yeah. Go
participants, and then what do I do? Just mute folks.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to be muted now. Cool. Thanks. All right. Right. Undefined. Why? Let's take a look here at what's happening with session. I was anticipating this being less of like a watching me debug things session, but hopefully you're finding this thought process somewhat useful. Normally just a tad more polished with it, but hopefully, as I say, you find this useful. So it did insert the record, it did insert the new session, but it returned this session.sessionID returned undefined. So it did create it. So the issue was probably here. So let's easy way to test this is let's create another session here. Yeah, look, still undefined, but we console log the whole session. Oh, I think I understand the. Do I understand the problem? Why is this undefined? Because all I really want to get is the name, and I want the session ID back out. This is actually really not important to assign it back to session, because we want to insert the new session in the database, and then all we want session to actually include is we want it to include the name, and we want it to include the session ID will be the new session dot session ID. It's not important that we get it from the database. All right, this should now be brilliant. So what we're going to do from JSON stringify is we will now return session ID will now be session ID. All right. Should get a session ID in return. Hang on. Session ID is not defined. Yep, Kevin, because that should be session.session ID. I think I was just a bit clumsy there and deleted something I didn't mean to. Let's wait for that to rebuild. And we really are now, I'm confident enough we'll get it done by the end if the front end portion we do nice and quickly. So I'm going to hit send and we get a session ID back. Wonderful. And that session ID will now be either a brand new session. Let's just test this again. Should still get a session ID back, and that is a different session ID. Fabulous. That's all MongoDB needs to do. It needs to store names and session IDs together. Now, in my little application that I showed you at the beginning, there's a few other things. I'm also storing whether or not a room is locked. And that's not a Vonage Video API thing. That's a client thing dealing straight with MongoDB. Right, so we've created this session, ace. Now, the final thing, I said we also required an API key. We can actually return that now. Process.env.api key. Remember, you don't want to be sharing your secret though, key's fine. And then finally, we want to return a token. As I said, tokens hold a bunch of information about a user. You can add arbitrary information in as well, up to a certain size. But what we really care about is the role. There are 3 roles. There is a publisher. So a publisher can both publish their streams, so they can send their video up to the OpenTop cloud, and they can subscribe to other people's streams. This is kind of when you're in like any video conferencing application, this is kind of the default. You can both publish and subscribe. There's a role called just subscriber, so they can just watch other people's streams. They can just subscribe. So this would be akin to actually what you're doing right now. You're not publishing, you're just subscribing. And then finally, there's a moderator. The moderator can also force other clients to disconnect. We're not going to focus too much on that now, though. So this one, fortunately, is not too difficult. We create a new variable called token, ot.generate token, 2 parameters. The first is a session ID. Well, we definitely know we can get that now, session.session ID. And the second parameter is an object with some options. And the only one we care about is the role. So role publisher, remember you can also put subscriber and moderator. That's how we get a token. We can throw a token back to the front end as well. So token will be equal to token. Wait for that to go, and then we'll just test the endpoint. And actually, this is our final endpoint. We don't need to do anything else. All we need to return is an API key, a session ID or token, where the session ID is the same for every person that you want to be talking together. Let's just send that and see. API key, boom, session ID. And then finally, it is in here. I got a little hasty there, token. So we are returning 3 pieces of information. Every time this endpoint is hit, we will grab a fresh token. They have quite short live times. They have quite short, but we will generate a new one every time. It's all we need to do on the, I know that felt, thank you for bearing with me. I know that felt like quite a lot, but let's just run through finally what this is doing. Someone hits the endpoint. Firstly, we check if it's a pre-flight request. If it is, we just say, hey, post requests are what we want here. And we just return a success code. We grab the name out of the object body. That's this part. We connect to the data. We connect to Mongo, to the database, because we provide the database URL up here. We initialize the, I'm not sure if initialize is the right word, but we grab the sessions collection. We go and see if there's already a session with the name that we've been sent. If there is, great, session now contains that document. And if not, create a new session, insert it in the database, and then just make sure this session variable up here is updated with the appropriate name and ID. Then generate a token with a publisher role and return the data. We return an API key, a session ID, and a token. If there's any problems, console log the error and just return a 500 with the error description. Hopefully that'll, I know, again, we had a few hiccups, but hopefully that feels quite palatable. Now let's build a front end. Let's build a client. I'm going to go to the side, excuse me, just create an index.html page. We're going to do all the work in here. We're going to have to write some JavaScript. We'll do it in a script tag though. So I'm going to build just the most basic HTML page. So we have HTML, we have a head, we have a body. I think I'm not even going to bother with the head. I'll leave it there, but I don't think we're going to do anything with it. Now, in the body, we're going to need a few things. We're going to need a form. I'm going to give it an ID of registration, and I am going to move a little quicker in this part. So I'm going to create a form with an ID of registration. Inside of that, we're going to create an input with a type of text, a name of name. And I'm going to say this is required, so we can't send a request without something in this box. And we'll do a placeholder. We'll say, please enter a room code, a room name. And I'll just, wrap my text so we can see that. And then we'll also do a button. We'll just say enter. Then I'm going to create a div with an ID of call. There are only two elements that are required in here. The first is going to be called subscriber. We'll give it a class of subscriber. Do we need to give it a class of subscriber? Not sure we do. I think we just need an ID of subscriber. We'll also do one for the publisher. So let's just revisit terminology. The publisher will be our video streams. Could be a screen, could be a camera, could be multiple screens, multiple cameras, whatever. The subscriber is everyone else's stream that we are looking at. Great, so that's all we need for the markup. Finally, we need to go and actually include the OpenTalk client library. So if we're over on talkbox.com/developer, client SDKs web, there's actually just a URL here that I'm going to copy. I'm also going to just pop it in the chat. I'm going to pop that down here and then a script tag. This will be where we add our actual logic for this. So let's talk about what needs to happen here. Firstly, when someone so they'll type in fact, let me save this and let me just open it with a local host server. So please enter a room name. So they'll enter a room name, they'll hit enter. What we want to do is listen for when enter is hit, grab the value of the box, that will be the name. We need to form a request to our endpoint, send a request to our endpoint, get the API key, session ID, and token back. And then we need to, do all of the connecting to the OpenTalk cloud stuff. Sounds like quite a few steps, but I'm pretty confident we can do it in 6 or 7 minutes. I'm not going to spend too long on this, and rather I would give you I'll give you a link to the finished code. So rather than play along with this, unless you're a particularly quick typer, I would recommend watch, understand, ask questions. So we're going to grab the form We don't actually need this sidebar open right now. So we need the form. So we'll go document.get element by ID, and we'll say registration. Fabulous. Then we'll say form, we'll add an event listener, and the event will be submit. So we'll look for when the form is submitted. When the form is submitted, first thing we want to do is prevent the default behavior, which is to refresh the page, or it would refresh the page in this context. And what we want to do is, let's think about this. We want to go to the endpoint, don't we? So we can use what is known as JavaScript fetch. We provide a URL in here. So HTTP localhost 9000 /session, yes, singular. Second argument is going to be an object which has some options. Firstly, the method. Well, we know we can only send a post request based on the pre-flight, that kind of options block we put at the top of our Netlify function. So we have method post, and we're going to want to send some data. Just like the way we have to send data as a string, we have to, from our endpoint, we also need to do the same on the client. So we'll go body dot, no we don't, we want to go JSON dot stringify, and all we want in here is a name, and we want the name to be the value of the input box. We can do that by going form.elements.name.value. So that will go off, make our API call exactly equivalent to this, where that value is the value in the text box. Then we want to turn the response into JSON, and then we have a response. And I'm just going to console.log the response. We can take a look at that together. So over on the front end, open my browser console. Ooh, I do not know what this error is. Let's try it and see if it's something else. We'll go Kev, hit enter. Yeah, seems fine. Odd. I'm actually just gonna ignore these for now. Anyway, the data we get back is the API key, the session ID, and the token. Wonderful. Now we need to do something with them. So what we're going to do is we are going to connect to the session. The way we do this is we create session. We can call it anything we want. I'm going to call it session. ot.init session. 2 parameters, the API key and our session ID. Like so. Next, now that we have kind of connected to that session, we want to create what is known as a publisher. So a publisher, as I say, is our own webcam video, our own screen share. I'm going to use our camera. You might want to hide this behind like a button so it doesn't automatically do this. Maybe you wait for them to turn their camera on. We're just going to do it by default though once they load the page and we get the requisite information from our API endpoint. So I'm going to create a new variable called publisher. Publisher. And we need to tell it, so ot.init publisher. The first argument is going to be an ID of a element in our HTML where we should put all of the video elements. We already created one, we called it publisher. So we'll put all of the, you know what, subscribers, publishers. So we'll go into publishers. Then we've connected to our session, we've created our publisher. Now there are some error handling things we can do, but in the interest of time, I'm actually just, this should work. We'll find out, and if not, we'll go and amend that. So next we want to go to our session, we want to connect to it. And when we connect to a session, we have to provide our token. There's a callback function. And once we are connected to the session, let's go to that session and publish to it. our new publisher that we've created. So that's it. We need to go grab the data from our API endpoint. We initialize the session, we create a publisher, which by default will be a camera, but you can provide information in here such as, no, actually this is a screen. We connect it to the session, and then immediately we will publish our publisher, which is our camera. Finally, we want to deal with events when other people join our session. So when someone else joins, we want to immediately subscribe to their stream and plop it in the subscribers div. There's an event listener for this. So we can go session.on, stream created. And when a stream is created, we get a callback function and we will go and subscribe. And again, I know I'm going through this very quickly. This is more because I want you to understand the concepts, and then I'll give you the code base at the end. Or I'll show you my code base again. So we will subscribe event.stream. So that's the stream of data. And we want to pop it in the subscribers. All right. That is actually our front end kind of done. So if I join Kev, it'll ask for information, it'll ask for permission. There's my camera, wicked. Open a new tab. We'll go to the same room. There you are. One of those is a publisher and one of those is a subscriber. So that works. I think my computer's being a bit overwhelmed by how many times I'm using my camera. But that's it. That is our video application built. Wonderful. Now for a final step, this serverless function, this serverless application is brilliant. Like, we don't always need to have a server running, but right now it's running on our computer. So we're going to want to package this up and push it up to Netlify and get it to work. Fortunately, this will only take 5 minutes. Firstly, we're going to have to push this whole code base to GitHub, except for a few files. We do not want to send up this .m file. We don't really want to send up function/build because that will be created by Netlify on deploy. And finally, we don't want to send up this Node_modules folder because, again, Netlify will grab those when it's required. In order to exclude those, we create a file called git ignore. In there, we can put .env, we can put Node_modules, and we can put functions/build. Node_modules. That's brilliant. Now let's turn this into a Git repository. Git init, and you'll notice these are grayed out. That's because they're being ignored by Git. Now we're going to go ahead, and so we've created this new Git repository. We're going to add every file in this directory to the stage. We're going to commit, initial commit, and now we need to go and push it to GitHub. I'm going to go over to my browser, go to github.com/new, and it will bring us up on the create a new repository page. I'll call this MLH Video Workshop. Make it public, add a description, whatever you want. We will go and create the repository, grab this URL, and go git remote add origin, and then the URL, and git push origin master. And it will go and push that code up. Shouldn't take too long. There's not a lot going on here. We refresh this and we should now have all of our code minus the files we do not want to be seen. Okay. Next, we're going to go to Netlify now that we've got a Git repository, and I'm going to go and log in. Big heart for Netlify. I'm hosting quite a few little bits here. And we're going to create a new site from Git. Pick GitHub. I've already authenticated, so I can go find my repository. MLH Video Workshop, and apparently some ancient MLH repos from a day past. Now there are a few steps here. Firstly, the build command. So every time we update our GitHub repository, it will notice, and it will redeploy the site. And we can give it a command that it should run to do that. We created this right at the beginning. We called it npm run netlify build. And that will go and it will create the build folder without setting up the local server. The other thing we want to do is go into the advanced settings and add 3 environment variables. And these are going to be how we get this data into our Netlify application. So we can say API underscore key is this. API underscore secret is this. And finally, the DB underscore URL will be this, and we'll deploy site. This will take a little moment the first time. It'll give you a random URL, and it will go and deploy. And in fact, we can go in and just keep an eye on how that deploy is going. So let's take a little look. So this will just take a moment. So it's building. So it's here, it's running Netlify, npm run Netlify build. So it's doing that here. There's actually a chance we could have omitted putting in the build command, because I think it might have picked it up from this netlify.toml, but I'm not, maybe not. Build.command from, oh no. Oh, but you could have provided it in here as a command, and I think it would have picked up automatically. Anyway, site is live. So now if we go over to our functions tab, we notice our new sessions, function. And if you log anything, do a console.log, and it runs, it will console.log here. Now we have this URL. Let's try it out in Postwoman. So we have this URL. We have name kev3. We hit send, and we should get back. Interesting. Oh. Task timed out after 10 point. Ah, yes, a thing I said we would come back to. And actually, happy I remembered quickly. And I'm also kind of happy that this happened so I can explain. When we first set up our MongoDB Atlas database, we whitelisted our IP address. This code is no longer running on our computer. And unfortunately, Netlify don't provide IP ranges on which Netlify functions will run. So what we need to do is kind of lift that restriction on our database. It can be accessed from anywhere. So I've gone to my project, I've gone to network access, I can add an IP address. There's this button that says allow access from anywhere. If you click it and hit confirm and just let that change deploy, now it is not only for IP addresses that are on the allow list. It is now available everywhere, which means all that's stopping someone being able to access your database is access to your username, password, and URL. So just be aware that, this, if you're thinking in terms of risk, you have increased the risk somewhat. In the context of this application, no, that is okay. Let's refresh and see if it's gone ahead and done that. Not yet, it's deploying the changes still. Creating a plan, great, everything looks fine. Now let's try this again. There we are, API key, session ID, and token from our Netlify URL. So what happens now if we go over to our new Netlify project and hit the URL? I type something in, I hit enter, and hit allow. Why did that work? Oh, I think this might have worked just because I've got localhost 9000 still running. But if I stopped my local server, that would stop running, because in index.html, we're still going for localhost 9000. And once I stop running it, that will no longer work. So there are multiple ways to do this. I'm going to do a pretty inelegant, but hopefully quite easy to understand way. So what we'll do is we'll create a new variable called URL, and the URL will be our Netlify URL. And then we'll say, so there's our URL. Then we'll say if the location.host name is equal to localhost, so it's on localhost. Then what we'll do is we'll update URL to HTTP localhost 9000/session. And then finally, we will update this with our new variable. I'm going to stop this local server so we can just test it all works in a moment. We're going to make a new commit, updated fetch URL, git push origin master. Oh, I think I missed an underscore. Where? I think I missed an underscore. I did not underscore, Mr. Bracket. No, this is the first argument, and then the second argument is this object. So I think this is correct. Yeah, cool. No, all good. Thank you so much for being vigilant in finding errors that might be happening. So if I go over to deploys, we've updated this fetch URL, and it goes through it automatically, deploys it, which has happened. Our function will be updated if it has updated. And now, finally, we can go in and use our video application in full. Everything's hosted on Netlify. Let's talk through what happened here. In our sessions.js, actually, let's just do a real whirlwind tour from the beginning. So we created a package.json file with npm init-y. We installed our dependencies. We then went in and created 2 new scripts, one to use for development, one to use for deployment. We created a netlify.toml file. That's kind of the basic setup to get Netlify functions running. We created inside the functions source session.js this file. We load in our environment variables from the .env file. We create a new Mongo client and a new instance of that client. We do the same for the OpenTalk library. So we require it, and then we have this instance of it. We also created this function down here to create a new session, which promisifies ot.create session. And all we really care about out of that is the session ID, but we return the whole session. Now in our main function, every time it's requested, we'll go grab the name from the body, that JSON object we send. We connect to the database, connect to the collection, find if there is already an item with this name. If there is, fantastic. If there isn't, we go and create one and store it in the database. We generate a token and we return the API key, the session ID, and the token. Then on the front end, we have this form, and when someone hits go on the form, we will go off to our API endpoint, either local or remote on Netlify. A post request will send the value of the input. We will initialize the session on the client, create a publisher, connect to the session, and then publish the publisher. And whenever we see that there is another stream has been created from someone joining or leaving, then we will subscribe to that stream and dump the video item in the subscribers block. Now, while that was going on, I got a few notifications. I think Will invited me to the Fellows community space. I think you might be using Discord. More than happy to have a conversation in here. I'm also more than happy to provide the link to the GitHub repository for my slightly more fully featured version of this. Also the link to this exact code base as it sits on GitHub, because that was part of the deployment process. Thanks for bearing with me. I know that wasn't the smoothest ride, but hopefully you understand how these pieces come together. Will, I'm kind of done. I'm not sure if you take questions, or we can do that in Discord or whatever.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Really do appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, you can either unmute yourself or put it in the chat, and Kevin will hop around, hang around for a couple of minutes. But yeah, I have just invited Kevin to the Discord server, so especially as Kevin's doing 2 more workshops, potentially even more.
They'll be smoother.
No, that was really good. Don't you worry. But you can ask him directly in the Discord as well. He'll be around to give a hand.
Absolutely.
Awesome. And then we'll work out how to do this recording, which I don't know how it's going to work. I'm pretty sure it's going to record it to the fellowship account, but we'll work that out.
If it's a challenge, though, the fortunate thing with this one is I've written up a majority of it as a blog post. I've just used a different database, which is also free. So if you do want to refer back to it, I have a code base with MongoDB and then a blog post step by step with a different database. So you will have what you need to build something like this.